Who is the world's most dangerous man? I guess it depends on who you're asking. As to the answer to that, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, oftentimes puts out a list that contains the public enemy number one. And this is supposedly the most dangerous person in America at any given time. And people such as John Dillinger, Al Capone, Bonnie and Clyde Barrow, I guess they were public enemies number one. And others have been that. Some might say, well, the public enemy number one, that's the world's most dangerous man, even though it primarily is in America, but that is their world. Others might have said in past and even up into current, certain world leaders like an Adolf Hitler. Today it might be Kim Jong-un, the North Korean terrorist president. And some might think he's the most dangerous at any given time. Others might say the world's most dangerous man is whoever the leader is of the greatest terror organization of the time. Right now, we would point to ISIS. Osama bin Laden was in that position at one time. And so, depending on who you're asking, the answers might vary. But I want to contend today that the world's most dangerous man is none of those, because the people I just shared are people who can kill the body. They are people who can destroy buildings and do damage physically to this nation and to the earth. But I would contend to you the world's most dangerous man is really not one who does outward destruction and outward disfigurement. Not trying to be overly dramatic, just saying that I believe the world's most dangerous man is the one who outwardly pretends to be filled with the Spirit, but inwardly really is not. Now, why do I think that? You say, Pastor Johnny, really? That's a little dramatic to say that that kind of guy is more dangerous than a terrorist or more dangerous than an evil dictator. Once again, my concern is not with those who damage things outwardly. Outward damage can be repaired. You say, what if they take lives, physical lives? Let me tell you what's worse than taking a physical life. What's worse is someone who causes people to spiritually be cut off from God because of who they are. I want to show you an example of what I believe to be possibly the world's most dangerous type of man. It's found in the book of Acts. It's really chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, but we'll begin in chapter 4, verse 36, through chapter 5, verse 11, looking at what I believe to be a possible example of the world's most dangerous man. It is Father's Day. We are studying right now through the book of Acts, and last week I finished Acts chapter 3 all the way through verse 10. So some of you who may be aware may have noticed that we're skipping half of chapter 3 and all of chapter 4. Well, we're really not skipping them. Actually, as I originally had it scheduled, we would hit chapter 5, verses 1 through 11 today, but it just took us longer to study through those earlier chapters than I had originally planned. So nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and camp in chapter 5 today because it is Father's Day, because I am speaking to men. And I'm just convinced this passage is so applicable to all of our men. Let me say, as I do every year on Mother's Day and Father's Day, on Mother's Day I speak to the women, on Father's Day I speak to the men. Men, whether you are a father, whether you are a grandfather, whether you are a great-grandfather, whether you have no children at all, and you're not a biological father, but because you're a member of this church, you have a You have a stake in what happens to our children, like a father might. Even if you don't have any children in this church or anywhere else, you have a stake in what happens to the coming generation. Men. And so today I speak to all of our men. Let's talk a little bit about who is the world's most dangerous man. Now, to get there, let's take a few moments and let me review, not really review, actually survey chapters 3 and 4 of Acts, since we ended up in Acts chapter 3, verse 10. Where we stopped last week was where Peter and John healed a lame man. Well, by the time verse 10 hits, he was the man formerly known as the lame man. And God began to do a great work all the way through the end of chapter 3 as he comes, and Peter began to preach a message. And I say I hit verse 10 last week. Actually, we finished all the way through chapter 3 last week with a message called basically 5 elements that should be present when we share the gospel with the lost. So really we covered through chapter 3, but by the time the end of chapter 3 hits, Peter has preached this message, and as chapter 4 picks up, some of the religious leaders do not like the attention that Peter and John and some of that leadership are gaining. As a result, they arrest Peter and John. They note that Peter and John have been with Jesus. They threaten Peter and John. They beat Peter and John. They let Peter and John go. And Peter and John immediately go to find their attorneys, right? Mike Costello. Not really. Ken Nugent. I got to tell you, I got to be honest with you, I never hear a Ken Nugent commercial that I don't think of Ted Nugent, who's not a lawyer at all, but I just can't help it. No, they do not go to their attorneys, they go to a prayer meeting. And they go to that prayer meeting where all the believers gather together and pray. And I got to tell you something, to all of us Baptists, well, not all of us Baptists, some of you have a different experience in your backgrounds. Many of you have experience as Baptists. When you gather for a prayer meeting, it's very quiet and very calm, and everyone prays silently. Not so their prayer meeting. They was all praying out loud at the same time. Pastor Johnny, how do you know that? Because that was just simply how they prayed in those ancient times. They were lifting their hands, lifting their voices. It was not chaos. It was not out of order. They were praying, and they prayed so powerfully that the place shook, and God did a great work. And by the time you hit chapter 4, verse 32, we have another commentary on Acts where it said, man, things were going and blowing in that early church. And they were taking care of each other, and they were helping each other. In fact, so much so that people were selling things and taking the money and bringing it to the apostles, and the apostles were distributing the money. By the way, back in chapter 2, people were selling stuff and giving it straight to the people in need. By chapter 4, we have developed at least one level of church organization and leadership. Now they're taking the money, giving it to the apostles, and the apostles are distributing it. You know, or many of you know, that by chapter 6, they will add another level of church organization by choosing the men who will, then they'll take the money and make sure it's distributed well so the apostles can just keep preaching. Nevertheless, there's a guy that apparently made such a generous contribution that his name is mentioned specifically. I love the fact that Barnabas is mentioned for the gift he gives. Now I know how we are in today's church. Well, Pastor, we can't just mention one person giving, because everybody else who gave, they'll be offended. Well, I don't know. Luke didn't seem to have a problem with it. Nevertheless, he mentions what Barnabas gives, and to such a degree that even out of all the other people who give, Barnabas' name is mentioned. And as chapter 5 picks up what can often happen, there was a man and his wife who decided that if it was good for Barnabas, it was good for them. Not the giving part, not that part, but the recognition part. There was a man and his wife that decided, you know what? We like that. Not the giving part, but the attention part. Ooh, they like that. I don't know if y'all know this. Sometimes, we have men, if we're not careful, who do things so that they will appear to everyone on the outside as spiritual men. And they're more interested in the attention they get for doing a good thing than they are actually just doing the thing. Let me show you what I mean. Acts, beginning in chapter 4, verse 36. We'll study through verse 11 of chapter 5. We will read it as we study it. But in this message, we will discover both some causes and some consequences of the world's most dangerous man. Who is that? Once again, a man who pretends to be filled with the Holy Spirit, but he really is not. He's just an outward imitation, but inwardly, he's really not walking with the Lord or loving the Lord. It is an imitation, a cheap imitation. It's like that wax fruit you put on your table. It looks great till you bite into it, and then it's horrible. That's the kind of men I'm talking about. And by God's grace, look, I'm not here to berate our men at Green Acres. I'm not here to do that, because this may not apply to you, and praise the Lord. I don't think it applies to most any of our men, but if this is you today, let me say before we're done, well, when we're done, we'll have an opportunity to respond. And if there's any men, young or old, who might say, I think this is me. Listen, your response is not to be embarrassed. Your response is not to be humiliated. Your response is to say, you know, God, I want to be not the man who pretends to be in love with the Lord. I want to be the man who is in love with the Lord. And if that's the case by the end of this message and you want to respond, fact is, some men may say, Pastor, I want to respond. I just don't know that I'm ready to come down front. Well, I'll tell you this. When we're done here today, I'll be in the back. Pastor Mike will be here. We have deacons here. We have guys who would love to sit down and talk with you. And they won't judge you. We're not about just judging. Here's the thing. If we have men who are like the man I'm talking about today, and they want to repent of it, us judging you will do nothing for you. And so we don't. We just want to help you walk with God. And that is our goal. And so, men, here are some causes, 2 causes in particular of the world's, man becoming one of the world's most dangerous men. First of all, one of the causes is when he is envious of Spirit-filled men. Being envious of Spirit-filled men can be a problem. Look at verse 36. And Joseph, who was also named Barnabas by the apostles. That word Barnabas is translated, verse 36. What's it translated? Son of encouragement. Son of encouragement. Who gave Barnabas that name? Yeah, Barnabas didn't give himself that name, by the way. Why do you think the apostles gave him the name Son of Encouragement? He was an encourager, right? It's rocket science. It was who he was. And so the apostles gave him that title. You know, when we're in the process of nominating deacons, in fact, you have a leaflet in your bulletins that will allow you, Green Acres Baptist Church members, to nominate men who to possibly be deacons. I want to tell you something. Here's what we want. We want to select deacons who are already deacons. You know what the word deacon means? It means servant. Diakonos. In fact, the word originally meant one who does servile work. The verbal form means to serve. By the way, that word diakonos can sometimes, one form of it can sometimes be translated minister. So we want men who take on the title of servant to be men who are already serving. Make no mistake about it, man, if you're not already serving, taking on the title of servant isn't going to cause you to be that. Why am I talking about deacons? Well, for one, because we're nominating right now, but it's a great illustration. Barnabas was given a title because he was already doing what they called him, son of encouragement. And so he went on, a Levite of the country of Cyprus. John Mark is from Cyprus. Remember that. That's going to be very important later in Acts. It's going to be a while. I'm going to have to remind you again. But Cyprus, Barnabas being from Cyprus, is very, very important for later on in the book of Acts, particularly with John Mark. Anyway, in verse 37, having land, sold it. According to verse 37, what did Barnabas own? Land, which eliminates the idea that Christians got rid of all their land, right? We've still got landowners. There is no indication in the book of Acts that all the believers took all their stuff and put it in a common pool like a commune. This is not a commune. This is a spiritual community. And people still own their property, and yet they saw it not as theirs, but as God's. And so Barnabas sold this land, and he brought the money and laid it. This word laid means to place. It's the idea of walking up, laying it down, walking away. Didn't ask for his name on a building. Didn't ask for any recognition. Didn't lay it down and say, I will give it as long as you do fill in the blank with it. He just laid it there and walked away. What we're going to see in chapter 5 is this. A guy named Ananias, he saw all this happening. Some of this you have to read between the lines a little bit. But he saw all this happening. The only person who's mentioned in the giving in chapter 4 is Barnabas. And it was such a great recognition that what we'll see here is Ananias wanted the same recognition, not the same service. He wanted the same attention, not the same sacrifice. And so here is a possible cause of the world's most dangerous man. It is that he is envious of real Spirit-filled men. See men serving the Lord, just trucking along serving the Lord sometimes. I've seen it happen. And then there are men who like the recognition. Isn't he a fine man? Maybe a young man. He's a fine young man. They like that attention. They don't necessarily want the level of sacrifice or service the Spirit-filled men are given, but because of the enviousness of the attention they're receiving, they're going to try to portray something on the outside. And listen, you and I, in the immediate, we can't always tell the men who are really Spirit-filled and the men who aren't, at least in the immediate. Now, over time, men who aren't Spirit-filled, they'll show who they are. I got that. But sometimes for a brief period of time, we might think a man he's really not Spirit-filled, he's just acting out to get attention. We might think as human beings that he really is, and we don't know the difference. Know this, you can't read somebody's mind. You don't know. Sometimes we like to, I'm very discerning. No, you're not. I mean, I don't mean to be harsh, but I really think many believers think they're a lot more discerning than they really are. Because I hear it a lot. Well, I can tell. He didn't say it this way, but I could tell. No, you can't. God can. God knows what people are thinking. Stop trying to act like you can read people's minds. You might read their mind. Boy, I know he loves the Lord, and he really doesn't. I don't think he really loves the Lord. Maybe he really does. I'm just saying that sometimes one man could look at another Spirit-filled man and like the attention he's getting and become a little envious, and that might cause him to want to act the same outwardly, but no change inwardly. Number 2 cause. If the number one cause, if the first part of the cause of bringing this most dangerous man is envying a Spirit-filled man, the second might be being an emulator of a Spirit-filled man. So he's envious, and then he wants to do it. Watch this, verse 5. But a certain man named Ananias. God loves irony, I think. And I'm not just trying to say that because it makes some great point. The reason I say that in this part is because Ananias' name means God is merciful. And his wife, Sapphira, her name means beautiful. Neither of which will be true about them by the end of the story. See, isn't God merciful? Yeah, God is merciful. But God is also just, and his justice balances his mercy. And his mercy sometimes pauses where his justice picks up for perfect balance. And when we finish this story, we will not necessarily see mercy showed upon Ananias, although I believe God is showing mercy on the rest of the church. Anyway, verse 1, they sold a possession. it does not actually say what the possession is, although some of your translations say a piece of land, right? So we have to assume it was a piece of land because that's what Barnabas sold, right? Barnabas sold a piece of land. Everybody talked about Barnabas. Hey, honey, did you hear what everybody was saying about Barnabas? They were all down at the church house talking about Barnabas and what he gave and the land he sold. Hey, honey, we got a piece of land. We could sell it like Barnabas. And so I believe they sold it, verse 2. And he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it. Now pause there for just a second. If I were to go out and sell a piece of property, is there anything in the Scriptures that would somehow rebuke me for taking a portion of it and giving it and keeping a portion of it? Is there anything inherently sinful about that? Is there anything inherently sinful about you taking your paycheck, taking a portion off the top, giving it to the church, and keeping the rest? Not only is it not sinful, actually that's kind of biblical, right? So selling something or taking a portion of what you have in finances or material things and giving a portion and keeping the rest is a thoroughly biblical idea. That's how we know that in verse 2, that's not what Ananias and Sapphira are doing. In fact, the verb kept back means to set apart. They kind of hid it, if you will. Now, maybe back in that day, they didn't have public records. I mean, today, once a house sells, you can go online, you can figure out what it sold for. Ananias and Sapphira would have had a tough time doing today what they did back then, wouldn't they? I was talking yesterday with Andrew, and I said, it's funny to me, and sometimes when you're shopping for a car, and if you're a car salesman here, this is no downer on you. But I was like, some of the guys I've talked to in car sales, I just think, dude, don't you know what Google is? I mean, you're telling me stuff. All I got to do is pull up my phone, and I can show you you're wrong, right? So Ananias and Sapphira would have had a tough time doing today what they did back then. They sold a piece of property, and here is the gist of what they did. They took a part of it and brought it to the apostles, but what we'll find out, what they did was they claimed they sold it for a certain amount when they actually sold it for a lot more. And then they brought a portion to the apostles. Here's the intent of their hearts: to make people think they were giving much more than they actually were. Now, why would someone do that? Why would someone because bringing an offering's fine, right? Why would someone bring an offering, and why would they want to make sure you think they sold it for a lot less than they really did? Why would someone want to bring a portion and make you think they're bringing a lot more than they actually were? Why would someone want to do that? I'm asking you. Pastor, we don't know. None of us will do that, right? Yeah, it's the recognition. It's the attention. They want people to go, ooh. And so it says, he brings it. And Peter says, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? Pause. There's really no way Peter knows this except the Holy Spirit has enabled him. This doesn't all of a sudden become some spiritual gift. This is an event. What we're reading here in the book of Acts chapter 5 is the only time we see it happen in the entire New Testament. It never happens again. God is making a statement from the get-go. From the very beginning of the church, He's making a statement about how He feels about us pretending we're one thing when we're really another. He didn't like it. And so verse 4, He says to him, while it remained, was it not your own? Somebody help me. What did Peter just ask Ananias? It was yours, right? Yeah. Wait, Ananias, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't this your property? And you know what? Nobody asked you to sell it. You didn't have to. You could have kept the property and still obeyed God. And so nobody asked you to sell it. But when you did sell it, truth is, if you didn't give a dime of the proceeds, it was nobody else's business. But whatever you did give was totally up to you. Whatever God put on your heart, folks. That is why I believe the New Testament principle of giving is grace giving. As God has poured His grace out upon you, we respond in that way rather than sitting kind of legalistic, very narrow amounts that everybody's supposed to give. You give as God's grace is poured out upon you. So Ananias, you could have given whatever you wanted to. We're not talking about legalism here. That's not the point. That you got to set, that hey, if you sell something, we're going to show up at your door and collect what's the church's, right? That's why I don't like the term, I paid my offering or I paid my tithe. Because we don't pay it, we give it. Paying it is I'm paying it and I get something back in return. If I go into the store and buy an item for $20, I pay $20, I get the item back. When I'm giving, I'm just giving with no conditions. It's just to the Lord. So give. Anyway, Ananias thinks he's emulating Barnabas, and really he's not. And I'm convinced that one of the causes of men acting like one thing on the outside and really they're not is they're trying to emulate men who really are walking in the Spirit because they're envious of the attention those men sometimes receive. Verse 5. Now we're going to look at two consequences of being the world's most dangerous man. It's a man who acts on the outside as if he's walking with the Lord in Spirit-filled, and really he's not. He's maybe he's been envious of other men who are really walking with the Lord. Maybe he's trying to emulate them. Here are a couple of consequences. Now, hear what I'm saying. This is not an exhaustive study on men who are imposters spiritually. Okay, so there are a lot of other things we could look at, but for this story, this is what it points to. One of the consequences of being this kind of man, men, is you jeopardize your church. You jeopardize your church. It is incredibly damaging to a church when men who claim to be Spirit-controlled are out in the world living like unsaved people. Watch this. Verse 5. Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So, what happens in the church and around it? Scared to death. Great fear. Now, that fear was for a purpose, and God had it there for a purpose, but I would contend that God would probably rather have had it without the great fear. And just with a man walking with the Lord who gave because God poured grace out upon his life, and he responded in generosity. It didn't have to happen. Verse 6. And the young men arose and wrapped him up, carried him out, and buried him. This afternoon after church, our youth are heading off to youth camp. Their youth were burying a dead man. I mean, that can't be enjoyable. Students will go, I just don't know about, I don't know if I want to be involved in the youth ministry. All those youth are going, All right. And all this was happening, and there's all this anguish and sad. What about Ananias' friends? You say, well, why did God do this thing? God's making a clear statement. It's the only time I said it happens in the book of Acts, only time it happens in the New Testament. God is making a statement. I do not like people who claim to be on the outside Spirit-filled, but on the inside they're not, and they're only doing it for attention. I do not like it. Men, he doesn't like it any more today than he did then. But Pastor, he's not killing people over it. Well, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We don't see this happening, but it doesn't mean God's opinion of men who are false on the inside, trying to get attention on the outside, doesn't mean his opinion of those men have changed since Ananias did it. His opinion's still the same. I'm going to tell you, one of the greatest compliments that you could ever say about me is not about my preaching, it's not, but that I was honestly who I say that I am over the course of a long time. That's the greatest thing you can say about me. Not complimenting my preaching, not, boy, he's a great pastor, but he really is who he claims to be. This kind of compromise I'm talking about is destructive to the church body. You say, well, Pastor, God allowed this to happen. Sure he did. Look at verse 11. Great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. Now, Pastor, what we're going to see next, by the way, is that the church grows. You might say, well, Pastor, it seems like good things were happening. I'm just wondering how much better might they have been if Ananias was a Spirit-filled man walking with the Lord, just serving the Lord. How much better might they have been? Well, we don't know. All I'm saying is there's some bad stuff that had to happen in the church for God to make a point. And sometimes it does, but I'm just saying He'd rather it not have to. And so make no mistake, men, when you're this kind of man, you jeopardize your church. Ananias had jeopardized his church. The problem with this kind of compromise I'm talking about is how destructive it is to the church body. Now watch. There are maybe some men who claim, well, I'm just one guy. I don't really think my lifestyle or what I do in the privacy of my home really affects the church. Really. Just one small life, right? I came across a list. I came across this list some years ago. I believe it is in like the Trend magazine. It was looking at people who were just satisfied with something that's partial, even up to 99%. People say, well, if we're 99% good, then that's fine. And maybe in the church body we have some men. I'm just one guy. I mean, in the privacy of my home, what I do, in the privacy of my computer, what I do, in the privacy of my life when I'm away from my family, what I do, the privacy of my own heart, what I do, it really doesn't affect my church. I'm just one guy. And this list shows if we were thoroughly satisfied with 99% on a daily basis, some of the things that would be true if we were thoroughly satisfied with 99% good. First of all, 1.7 million, give or take, 1.7 million pieces of first-class mail would be lost every day if 99% were thoroughly adequate. In a given year, if 99% were thoroughly accurate, OBs who deliver babies would drop about 35,000 newborn babies if 99% were good. We would have unsafe drinking water about 3 days a year. That happened in Warner Robins just this last week, right? It caused all kinds of trouble. Businesses had to close down. What if that happened every year for 3 days? It's 99%, give or take. It's fine. 2 million people would die from food poisoning each year if 99% were adequate. I think you get my drift. Men, if you're saying, I'm just one man, it's really not going to have an impact. First of all, you're mistaken. You're mistaken. Men, I got to ask you a question. If every man were walking with Christ, seeking the Lord, walking with Him, if every man in this church were seeking the Lord like you do, what would this church look like? You jeopardize your church when you act like one thing on the outside and you're something else on the inside. And second, and this may be more critical, listen to what I'm saying here. If you don't listen to anything else, listen to this. You jeopardize your family. Folks at church may not know that you're a fake, but I'll tell you who you're not fooling, not for long. It's your family. Look at verse 7. Now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. That is, she didn't know her husband had died. 3 hours later, I'm sure they set up the whole thing. I'm going to go, I'm going to give it, and in a few hours, come on, and boy, everybody will be impressed. They worked on this together. That's why back in verse 2 it says he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it. Kind of the deal is they sat around, maybe breakfast that morning with a cup of coffee or one morning earlier in the month and talking about it, and they kind of put it together. I mean, I guess at least you could say they worked together as a team. So the wife shows up 3 hours after Ananias died. She walks in. Verse 8, and Peter answered her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And he quoted the price that Ananias had quoted. She said, yeah, absolutely. We sold it for that much. So now Peter knows she's involved in it as well. She's fully involved in trying to trick people to think they're more generous than they really are, so that they'll get the adoration but not the real sacrifice. In verse 9, then Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last, and the young men came back. Oh, Lord. They went from 50 in their youth ministry to about 5 in one day, right? Peter asked her the question. He was giving her an opportunity to come clean. But when she didn't, he knew she was fully in on it. He didn't want to assume that what Ananias had done involved, because he doesn't want the wife disciplined for the sin of the husband. So he gave her a chance. But guess what? When she answered, he found out, okay, she was fully involved. But guess who I think initiated the whole thing? Ananias did. And now look at his family. I mean, it doesn't say they have children, okay? So we won't assume that. But they had parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, maybe. I don't know. Now their family is crushed because these two have died. Now their close friends are devastated because these two died. I mean, I know we get a bad view of them here, but as far as we know, they were probably good folks in the community, had friends, and all that's gone. Ananias jeopardized his family, and make no mistake, men, you do too, when you act like one thing on the outside and you're really something else on the inside. What a horrible, terrible place to end up when you have an opportunity to be used by God. I got to tell you something, man. When it doesn't matter whether you get any acclaim or recognition or not, you just want to pour your life out unto the Lord. Oh my. And a church body, I'm going to tell you something. God gets a hold of the men in the church, and all they care about is pouring their lives out to Christ. Not a position, not notoriety, not what people see them doing and being impressed. None of that. They really don't care. All they want to do is pour their lives out to Christ. You get a church full of men like that, that may be called revival, Pastor Mike. I'm not sure. I came across years ago. This was back in the day of the cassette tape and typewriters, okay? So bear with me. The typewriters are something you typed on, students. It was not a computer. And it, right? So anyway, nothing quite as beautiful as when the electric typewriters are, you can go at it. And then how many of you know that sound? Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. That's correcting, right? Anyway, I came across this ad for these cassette tapes called Genius at Work. Let me read to you what the ad said. This is an honest ad. Genius at Work cassette tapes. Joe Hastings, if you bought any of these, don't tell me. I don't want to know, okay? When it comes to term papers, you're the creative type who likes to ponder your brilliant ideas before committing them to a typed page. Trouble is, your parents are clock watchers who are ever mindful of your approaching deadline and expect the sound of constant production coming from your room. Despair no more. Pastor Mike is going, where was this when I needed it? Despair no more. This is still the ad. You can all be satisfied thanks to Genius at Work, a long-needed cassette tape now on the market. After dinner, retreat to your room, shut the door, and turn on your tape player. Your walls will instantly echo with the industrious sounds of paper being rolled into a typewriter, followed by the clickety-clatter of somebody hard at work typing. A full 60 minutes of stereotyping while you recline in peaceful procrastination. By the way, the company is called the Dying Need Industries. And it's funny, but it is appearing to be one thing on the outside, and on the inside, not that at all. Men, if that's you, I'm telling you, you're putting your family in danger. You jeopardize your family for that. Who is the world's most dangerous man? I would contend. Someone might want to argue with me. I'm not going to argue it. I'll just say, from my estimation, is it a drug dealer? Is it a evil dictator? I would contend to you that it's a man who on the outside pretends to be one thing, but inwardly he's really not that in the church of Jesus Christ. One of the reasons I believe this is the world's most dangerous man, because it's not just one man. Too often churches have many of those. God help that we wouldn't at Green Acres. But I'm telling you, it jeopardizes your church. It jeopardizes your family. Years ago, when our Savannah, who's now just a couple of months from being 24 years old, years ago, she was about 2 or 3 years old. We all went on vacation with Alyssa's family, her brother and his wife, and we all were together for about a week in a two-bedroom, I think two-bedroom condominium, what it was. And so we were kind of packed in there. And the first day went splendidly. Had fun, went out and I think we were snow skiing at the time. Had a great time. But by that second day, a problem arose. Alyssa's mom developed a stomach virus. It's not a pretty sight. 2-bedroom condominium, 7 people. We went to bed that night, and about 2 a.m., I woke up as Alyssa was bolting from the bed toward the bathroom. Okay, I'm not going to give you a lot of detail. I'm just going to say she didn't make it. And so I spent about the next 30 to 40 minutes cleaning up the bathroom floor. Who would be next? It was her brother, her dad. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Savannah even got a touch of it. And her brother's wife, her sister-in-law, who at the time was pregnant, actually ended up in the emergency room because she was pregnant with that. For what it's worth, I never got it. Don't know why. That's where I got the title of cast iron stomach. What is the point of that story? I got to tell you something, man. When you have something like a virus, it's like by the end of the vacation, we were just all sitting around like deer in the headlights, seeing who's going to get it next. You don't see it. You don't see it. You just see the effect of it. Listen, guys, I'm going to tell you something. You may not see the fact that you're pretending to be one thing, but on the inside you're not. You may not see it. But I'm telling you, your family will see the effect of it. It will spread like a virus. And then later on, you'll be looking around going, I don't understand what happened. And the fact is, many of us that we don't know, if you're living a double life, many of us here in the church, we don't necessarily know because you're a good pretender. But what if today there's some men who say, you know what, I'm not concerned about what people think. I want to be real. And you were to come and say, Pastor, I'm not even sure that I'm saved. And I want to make sure of that because the life I'm living on the outside is very inconsistent. And some of you may say, Pastor, I believe I'm saved, but there's an inconsistency to my life, and I just don't want to be that on the outside. I want to be real. You know what? There are some of you men, you may have been sitting here today realizing, going, you know what? The last time I volunteered for something, the last time I got involved in something, in the back of my mind I did it because I knew it would impress people. And God help me, I just want to serve the Lord, not impress people. And maybe that's you today. I'm going to be here in front. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to stand, and I just want you to respond. Men, as the Lord leads, maybe you just want to come and kneel at this altar and pray. But I'm going to ask you to respond as the Lord leads. Father, right now in Jesus' name, help us to obey you. Why don't you stand right where you are?